with champagne glasses clinking and the echoes of polished laughter bouncing off the marbled walls of the Banana Island mansion. Obinna Okafor stood in the center of it all, proud, commanding, and powerful. Cameras flashed around him, and the glimmer of gold-trimmed furniture reflected the wealth he had so meticulously curated. Business tycoons, politicians, Nollywood stars, and social media influencers flowed in like royalty. This wasn't just a housewarming. It was a declaration of supremacy. Ifunanya emerged from the inner part of the mansion, barefoot, with a tray of small chops and water bottles. Her Ankara gown was faded from years of washing, her hair loosely tied into a simple bun. She wore no makeup, no jewelry. She hadn't planned to be part of the event. She preferred staying upstairs, quietly watching from the shadows. But the kitchen staff had panicked when they ran out of hands. She offered to help, not thinking much of it as she moved quietly between the guests. Some mistook her for one of the hired helps. She didn't flinch. It wasn't the first time. But this time, it stung deeper. Obinna's friends from Abuja had just arrived, men dressed in fine Italian suits, their wives adorned in sequined gowns and Brazilian wigs that swept the ground. They greeted Obinna with backslaps and praise, then gestured toward Ifunanya with puzzled looks. "Ah, who's that?" one of them asked, eyes narrowed, lips curled in subtle distaste. Obinna looked toward her, then away, as if hoping she'd vanish. He didn't. Instead, he chuckled nervously. "Just the maid," he said casually. "We brought her from the village. She's still adapting." They all laughed. Still adapting. Ifunanya heard it. Every word, every syllable. Her hands trembled, slightly, but she kept her face composed, her chin high. She placed the tray on a glass table and walked back into the house, her bare feet padding softly against the tiles. She did not cry. She did not scream. Instead, she walked straight to their bedroom, no longer a place of love but one of silence and distance, and sat down. Her fingers tapped lightly on her phone as she opened the folder she had named Plan B 2 years ago. Obinna had changed. The man who once wrote poetry on the back of her old notebooks had become someone she no longer recognized. For years, she had made excuses. He was busy, he was stressed, he had new responsibilities. But tonight stripped the last illusion from her mind. Calling her the maid was not just a lie. It was an erasure of everything she had ever meant to him. Ifunanya rose and walked to her wardrobe. Behind the neatly stacked clothes lay a dusty brown envelope. Inside it, land documents, signed by Obinna himself, but transferred quietly to her name. He never paid attention to the things he signed anymore. She had ensured that years ago when she started handling some of his property paperwork under the guise of reducing his load. She picked up her phone again and made 3 quick calls. First, to her lawyer. Second, to her younger brother in Enugu. Third, to the manager of the private school she had been secretly funding with the candle-making business. She didn't return downstairs for the rest of the party. And Obinna didn't notice. He was too busy smiling for cameras, clinking glasses with strangers, and telling stories about his hustle journey that carefully erased her from every chapter. That night, the mansion was silent. Ifunanya lay awake, listening to the waves crashing gently against the shore outside their estate. The moonlight poured through the curtains, illuminating the reality she could no longer ignore. At 5 a.m., she rose, bathed, and dressed. Not in Ankara this time, but in a crisp blue blouse and black trousers. Her hair was neatly braided back, her face bare but glowing with resolve. She packed only 1 suitcase. Then she left a letter on the bedside table. By the time Obinna awoke at 9 a.m., groggy from a hangover and dulled by the afterglow of admiration, Ifunanya was already gone. Her letter was short. "Since I am only your maid, you will not miss me. The woman you married no longer exists in your world, but she is alive, and you will see her again. This time, standing tall in her own right. Watch carefully. The maid is about to become more than you ever imagined." Obinna blinked, rereading the words. He didn't feel panic at first, only confusion, mild irritation. He assumed she'd be back. After all, where could she go? But by noon, calls from his bank began to come in. One of the jointly owned properties had been withdrawn from the company's portfolio. His lawyer mentioned a conflict over asset signatures. Then came the headline on Twitter: Candle brand owner buys out local manufacturing plant in surprise takeover deal. The photo beneath the headline was unmistakable. It was Ifunanya, dressed in that same blue blouse, smiling confidently, with her arm around the CEO of the plant. People began to talk, speculate, dig, and then they found her story. The woman behind one of the fastest-growing eco-friendly candle brands in the country wasn't just a former housewife. She was the original co-founder of Obinna's startup. Her name was buried in the early registration documents. Her candle business, which many assumed was a small hobby, had just signed a deal with an international distributor. Obinna's phone would not stop ringing. He sat in his glass-walled office, stunned, reading through blog posts, YouTube commentary, and LinkedIn articles praising Ifunanya's brilliance, her resilience, and her graceful silence in the face of erasure. In a single day, the woman he introduced as a maid had become the most talked-about entrepreneur in Nigeria, and it was only the beginning. Obinna stared blankly at his laptop screen as notifications pinged without mercy. His assistant hovered in the doorway, hesitating to step in. Something had changed in the air. Obinna, once an untouchable titan in the tech space, was suddenly vulnerable, not because of a market crash, not due to a hostile takeover, but because of the woman he had dismissed in front of his peers like an afterthought. Ifunanya had not just walked out, she had exploded into the public consciousness. By the second day after the party, her name trended on X, formerly Twitter, and every blog from Bella Naija to TechPoint had written features about her entrepreneurial journey. While Obinna's narrative had always centered around bootstrapping his business from cyber cafes and roadside suya stands, journalists uncovered photos of a young, hopeful Ifunanya in the background of those early startup days, packing products, running errands, building websites with free WordPress themes. People began to question the familiar success story they'd been sold. It turned out that Ifunanya had spent the last 3 years building Umuoma Scents, a sustainable candle and aromatherapy company that quietly supplied to boutique hotels in Abuja and Port Harcourt. While Obinna flaunted Teslas and dinner with governors, she invested every naira of her candle business into acquiring local resources, empowering rural women in Nsukka to work in dignified, paying roles. She had reinvested profits smartly and had recently inked a multi-million naira contract with a Ghanaian home goods chain. The news hit like a grenade in elite circles. Suddenly, social media flooded with praise for her grace, her silence, her strategy. Feminist think pieces were written. Podcasts dissected her every move. The very crowd that clinked glasses with Obinna a few nights ago now reposted Ifunanya's TEDx talk from a year ago, an obscure speech about building empires in quiet rooms that had gone ignored until now. Obinna refused to speak publicly. His PR team advised damage control, but he was paralyzed. Every move he made only brought more attention to his error. Internally, the board of his tech company started murmuring about optics. He was the face of a progressive, fintech brand, yet the story of his personal betrayal had gone viral. Investors, especially those abroad, began raising concerns. Meanwhile, Ifunanya didn't respond to the media frenzy. She didn't grant interviews. She didn't shade him on Instagram. She simply worked. In Enugu, she moved into a modest duplex near her candle production facility. Her mornings began with production reviews, team briefings, and mentoring sessions with local girls interested in business. She expanded her outreach and set up a vocational training fund for women affected by domestic financial control. What shocked everyone most wasn't just her business acumen, it was her calm. In a society used to noise, Ifunanya's silence spoke volumes. She did not fight Obinna in the tabloids. She did not insult him. She did not name drop. She let her success narrate the story he had tried to bury. Her letter, though short, became something of a manifesto. Young women quoted it online. It was printed on T-shirts, quoted in digital newsletters, and even read aloud during a women's leadership conference in Victoria Island. "The maid is about to become more than you ever imagined," became a rallying cry. Obinna, now battered by public opinion and professional doubt, tried to reach her. He sent texts, left voice messages, even flew to Enugu under the guise of a business opportunity and drove past her factory gates. But he never entered. He knew he wasn't welcome there anymore. At home, his Banana Island mansion felt colder. Not because of the air conditioning, but because it echoed now. The furniture meant nothing. The framed awards felt like decoration in a museum of a man who had lost his soul. He realized for the first time in years how quiet it was without. Her humming in the kitchen. Without the smell of candles she used to test in their bathroom. Without her tiny post-it notes left in his drawer reminding him to eat. She had never needed luxury. She had never craved the limelight. All she had wanted was partnership. And when he denied her identity, she took hers back, and more. But Ifunanya wasn't done yet. Her next step came 2 weeks later. A flyer appeared online. Umuoma Collective, Women Investing in Women. It was an open call for 50 women-led businesses in Nigeria to apply for mentorship, funding, and international exposure. The collective was backed not only by Ifunanya, but by a few quiet but powerful female investors from the diaspora. Obinna recognized one of them immediately, an angel investor who had once refused to fund his app years ago, citing leadership maturity concerns. The irony stung deeply. The event was scheduled to be hosted at Landmark Event Center in Lagos. Not Enugu, not Abuja, Lagos. Her return. On her terms, everyone waited. Would she address the incident publicly? Would she mention Obinna? The answer came when the keynote speaker was announced, Ifunanya Okafor, but she no longer used his surname. The flyer read, Ifunanya Nwachukwu, founder, Umuoma Sense and Umuoma Collective, her maiden name. Her origin reclaimed, Obinna received a VVIP invitation in the mail a few days later. He opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, on thick ivory, paper were the words, Obinna, you once called me a maid. I now host kings. No bitterness, just boundaries. You're welcome to attend, not as my husband, but as a man willing to learn. He dropped the invitation on the table, chest tightening. Yai had built empires, yes, but she had built something greater, a legacy, and everyone was watching. The day of the Umuoma Collective launch summit dawned with the same Lagos chaos. Honking Danfo buses, hawkers weaving between traffic, and clouds of smoke rising from roadside suya grills. But in the upscale heart of Victoria Island, the rhythm was different. Sleek convoys pulled up one after another outside Landmark Event Center, where a red carpet lined the entrance, flanked by camera crews and bloggers whispering names into microphones. It wasn't a celebrity wedding. It wasn't a movie premiere. It was the debut of something quieter, deeper, something revolutionary. Inside the venue, the air carried the warm scent of cedar and lavender, unmistakably from Umuoma candles placed on every table. Over 800 women filled the hall, entrepreneurs, artisans, young tech founders, and dignitaries. The decor was minimalist, yet elegant. White walls with vibrant motifs drawn from Nsuka heritage, golden lights softening the room, and banners bearing the slogan, built in silence, revealed in strength. And then she entered, Ifunanya Nwachukwu, no longer dressed in simple homeware, but in a tailored kente-inspired jumpsuit that spoke of heritage and modernity. No jewelry, but a single pair of gold stud earrings. No entourage, no flash, just presence. The room rose in unison. Some clapped, some wept, some simply watched, stunned that the woman once introduced as a maid now held every gaze, every breath, every heartbeat in that hall. She walked to the stage, unhurried. When she stood behind the podium, the cameras clicked furiously, but her hands didn't shake. Her lips didn't quiver. If she felt the weight of the moment, she bore it with poise. And then she spoke. She didn't mention Obinna, not once. She told stories about building with scraps, about nights lit by kerosene lamps while crafting candle prototypes, about rejection letters, failed batches, and factory accidents, about rural girls who had never dreamed of earning their own money and now employed others. She spoke of legacy, not the kind you inherit, but the kind you build and pass on. The audience, by the end, was on its feet. What the cameras didn't catch, though, was Obinna, seated in the second row, surrounded by his own silence. He wore a dark native outfit, stripped of his usual gold chains and flamboyant wristwatches. For the first time in years, he looked small, not because he had shrunk, but because he was no longer the biggest presence in the room. He watched her. Every movement, every pause, every smile. He remembered how she used to speak to him in soft tones when he doubted himself, how she used to map out business ideas on napkins while frying plantain, how she once told him, "Obinna, we must build for something bigger than applause." Back then, he hadn't listened. Now, applause thundered for her. And he, for once, had no script, no camera angle to hide behind. After the speech, Ifunanya disappeared into a crowd of mentees, international guests, and family from Nasuka, who had taken night buses just to witness her shine. Her mother, wrapped in a starched green lace, wept openly at the sight of her daughter's face on giant banners beside global CEOs. Obinna stayed till the end, hoping, perhaps foolishly, for a private moment. But Ifunanya remained elusive, not by intention but by transformation. She was no longer his to reach. He returned home to Banana Island that evening. The mansion greeted him with cold silence once again. The staff moved quietly, respectfully, like they did when Ifunanya was around, but now without her warmth to soften the air. In his study, he sat down with a drink and opened a drawer. Inside were old photos, ones he hadn't looked at in years. One showed the two of them, younger, broke, smiling over a plate of jollof rice in their tiny university flat. He stared at it for a long time, then quietly slid it into his suit pocket. The next day, he made a call, not to a journalist, not to a PR manager, but to a school principal in Nasuka. He asked to fund a scholarship in Ifunanya's name. The principal paused, surprised. "She already sponsors 10 of our girls," he said, "but you can add more if you like. She'll know you helped." Obinna only nodded. That week, he did something rare. He stepped down from a speaking engagement at a major conference and recommended Ifunanya instead. He sent her an email, not a plea, not an apology, just a simple line. "Thank you for showing the world what I was too blind to see." She didn't reply. But 2 weeks later, Obinna received a candle delivery at his office. There was no note. Just a simple umuoma box labeled Restoration. Inside was a cedar and honey-scented candle, warm and earthy, with a message embossed on the lid. Growth happens in the soil of truth. Months passed. Lagos continued to buzz with scandals, celebrity weddings, and political drama. But Ifunanya's story remained imprinted in people's minds like a watermark, subtle, enduring, inescapable. Her rise had shifted something cultural. She hadn't just reclaimed her dignity. She had altered the expectations of what a woman's role should be in the story of a powerful man. More importantly, she had redefined what power truly looked like. She never went back to the Banana Island mansion. She didn't need to. The Umuoma Collective flourished. The first batch of 50 women she mentored launched products ranging from natural skincare lines to digital health apps. Their testimonials flooded social media. Some women cried on camera while holding checks. Others recorded videos showing how their first offices were renovated mechanic shops or one-room flats. And each of them credited Ifunanya not just for the money, but for her belief in their dreams when no one else cared. Corporate Nigeria, ever thirsty for rebranding and wokeness, now queued to sponsor her initiatives. Banks offered partnerships. Foreign NGOs sent invites. But Ifunanya moved carefully. She chose only what aligned with her values: sustainability, truth, and dignity. Obinna, meanwhile, began the slow process of unlearning. He stepped back from interviews and withdrew from his usual spotlight circuits. Rumors swirled about why he had gone quiet. Some said it was guilt. Others assumed his company was collapsing. But the truth was simpler and more painful. He had been confronted with the kind of success that could not be bought, copied, or replicated. A success rooted in purpose. He started volunteering, anonymously at first, through organizations that offered business training to underprivileged youth. No one knew who he was in those rooms, and he preferred it that way. For the first time in years, he listened more than he spoke. One rainy Thursday, he sat quietly in a classroom in Agege, watching a young woman present a pitch for a mobile tailoring service. The girl reminded him of Ifunanya: sharp eyes, a quiet voice, a steady heart. She ended her presentation by saying, "I want to build something that won't crumble if a man forgets my name." The words punched the air out of him. He left before the applause began. Back in Enugu, Ifunanya was preparing for something bigger. She had bought land, quietly, strategically, on the outskirts of the city, and begun construction on a training campus for women entrepreneurs. It was to be a live-in academy, with workshops, production facilities, childcare services, and farmland for sustainability education. She named it the Umuoma Center for Women in Enterprise. It would be her greatest legacy, not the building but the ecosystem, a place where no woman would need permission to dream or validation to succeed. At the opening ceremony 6 months later, she stood once more in front of a crowd. But this time, there were no flashing lights, no red carpet, no celebrities, just women, hundreds of them, farmers, graduates, widows, teen mothers, coders, cooks. They had come to witness the ribbon cutting of a place built in their name. Her name. As she stood there, scissors in hand, a familiar figure appeared quietly near the back of the gathering. No suit, no cameras, no entourage. Obinna. He didn't move forward. He didn't wave. He simply stood, half soaked in the morning drizzle, watching her smile as the ribbon dropped and cheers erupted. He didn't need to speak. She saw him, and then, just as quickly, she looked away, not in dismissal, but in closure. She had forgiven him long ago. But forgiveness did not mean return. After the ceremony, she walked through the halls of the center slowly, breathing in the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings. The candlelight in each hallway flickered gently, a reminder of where she started, with wax and wicks, sweat and silence. In her office, she placed a frame on the desk. It wasn't her portrait. It was the old photo of her and Obinna in that university room, eating jollof on a plastic plate, unaware of the fire and frost the future held. She placed it not as a reminder of pain, but as a symbol of origin, of journey. In the corner of the frame she wrote in gold ink, "Never forget. Where you began, but never let it define where you stop." And with that she turned to the window, looking out at the women beginning their first classes, their voices loud with ideas and laughter. She had once been called a maid. Now she was a builder of queens, and the world had learned, you do not dim the light of a woman who knows her worth. You only delay the dawn. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me bring more heartfelt stories to life, one soul at a time. Please subscribe the Folkteller Bae